Good afternoon. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology Licensed Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. David Stevens.
Here.
Ginger Hill. Don't see. Rebecca Jabara.
Here.
Bruce Johnson. Lauren Luck. There you are. Sarah McMillan.
Here.
Iris Pauley. Robert Pedroza.
Present.
Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
Joshua Tangaway.
Here.
Kari Wold.
Here.
Note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Thank you. I'm here, and Leslie's available if we need her to log in later.
Very good. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning the meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On May 12th, 2025, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals that requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item, which is the approval of the agenda and or additions to the agenda. Does anyone have any additions? All right, seeing none, I would welcome a motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
I second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, motion passes. Hi, Iris.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
Well, you're fine. Okay, that takes us to item 3, overview of current advisory committee members.
Yes, and so all of the items in your new business for today is to review applicants for the advisory committee. There will be one opening that will be coming up when we start the new fiscal year in July. We provided those materials to you, but one of the items that we do ask advisory committee members to take into consideration when they're considering candidates is geographic location of those individuals. And so we thought we would provide a little information to you at the start of the meeting concerning the current members of the advisory committee and just highlight what areas those individuals are located in. And just as a reference, this information is actually on the BSRB website under the advisory committee. If you go to the specific page for any of the advisory committees, you can see a current list, and it identifies first the board members on the committee, and then it notes any of the non-board members that are in the committee, as well as their location in terms of practice region. And so the current members of the advisory committee, the chair is Dave Anderson, who is the BSRB board member for master's level psychology, and Dave is in Waukene. David Stevens, a public board member located in Westwood. The other members of the advisory committee, Ginger Hill in Independence, Rebecca Javara in Wichita, Bruce Johnson in McPherson, Lauren Luck in Shawnee, Sarah McMillan in Salina, Iris Polly in Wichita, Robert Pedroza in Roland Park, Jennifer Schreiner in McPherson, Joshua Tangway in Plainville, and Carrie Wald in Olathe. And I realize that sometimes individuals do move, so if any of that information is incorrect, this is also a good time for us to make sure there's any corrections. And so wanted to provide that to you so that you can factor that in when you're looking at applicants for the advisory committee. But also, if there are any errors, please let me know, and I'm happy to change that information on the website. So are there any comments from individuals or any corrections for me to make? Okay.
All right. Next, we'll go to a review and approval of the minutes from our meeting on April 2nd. Any requested changes to the minutes? All right, seeing none. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to the executive director's report, Dave.
All right, thank you, Dave. We will go ahead and start with some BSRB operations updates, and then I always try to keep the members of the advisory committee informed about updates from the most recent board meetings, and so we'll discuss that too. In terms of BSRB operations, we have made quite a few changes in the last year, and we have even more coming up in the next 2 years, at least, probably more beyond that. But in my mind, I'm thinking of 2 years because that is the time frame we've been given in terms of switching over to the new licensing database. And so we are moving to the state's enterprise licensing system, which is called Acela. That's the company that's facilitating that. We are, I think, about the 7th regulatory board or agency that's in line to move over. And we've been going through sort of a discovery process for the last few months, meeting with representatives of the Office of Information Technology Services. A number of members of my staff have been helping them understand our existing processes, our current forms, all the information we're collecting, so that when we build the new system, we won't be duplicating processes and we can have things integrated more efficiently. And so I'm really excited about that. I think they're nearing the end of the discovery process, but I think there's also one agency that has launched with the new system, and that is the Real Estate Commission. And from what I understand, as with any process like this, the first time one of the agencies launches, there's going to be some things to work out. But since we're 7th in line, I think by the time that we launch, a lot of those things hopefully will have been figured out, and it'll be smooth. And from what I understand, there haven't been big issues. It's just terminology differences and things that you don't realize until you go live with the system. So happy to report that we are making progress towards the new system. I think when that is in place, it will allow us to accept electronic applications. That's been a big thing we wanted to move towards for the last few years. We already had electronic renewals and have for some time, but it'll be nice to have more things electronic. One of the things that we're doing behind the scenes that's also helping with this process, we've been meeting with representatives from the Historical Society. That also is an organization that functions as the state archive for a lot of the records of regulatory boards like the BSRB. And over the last couple of years, we've made some changes to our document retention schedule. In the past, we have saved a lot of documents here in our office. And if you've been to our office, you know that space is very limited. So we have changed our schedule so that when someone's license expires and it's been expired for more than 2 years, we can transfer those records to the archive. We're also in the process of trying to switch from having a paper-based system to an electronic system, and that will assist also with space and record retention. And then we're also trying to make some similar adjustments to our disciplinary records and those schedules too. But that's kind of tedious work, and it has to be very precise, and it goes before a records review board. It's made up of members of the Historical Society and some other agencies like the Attorney General's office. So just want to let you know that we are taking those steps behind the scenes. Some of those you'll probably never see, but I want you to know that there's a lot of staff time going into these steps to make sure that when things do transfer over, it'll be pretty smooth. One thing that individuals can be doing, and we'll probably provide regular updates on this, is the board did launch an agreement with CE Broker to assist with our auditing process. When people renew their licenses, 10% are audited, and we ask them to provide documentation of their continuing education hours. Well, last fall, the board went into an agreement with a company called CE Broker that provides a free service for all of our licensees, that if they want to go ahead and use that, they can. It's an optional type of thing, but I encourage it because they can upload their documentation of their CE hours to a portal. And then if they are selected for audit, they don't have to send us anything. We can get into the portal, review what they have posted, verify that is correct, and then the audit would be completed very quickly. So we have a meeting that we are scheduling with CE Broker now that it's been about 5 months since the last of the professions were fully on board with CE Broker. We did those in about 3 phases, if you recall. The last ones went live January 7th. And so it's been about 5 months. So we're going to have an update meeting, hope to collect some information as far as how many of our licensees have activated their accounts, if there's been any issues, if there's anything we can inform licensees about to make the process easier. And then we're also making sure that we provide updated information to CE brokers so they have a good current list of our licensees. And so just kind of working out all those things behind the scenes. But I do still encourage people, if they haven't already, to sign up to use CE Broker. And if there are issues, to let us know about those issues so we can make the process better. But from what I have heard so far, that the majority of feedback I have received has been mostly positive. I think people have appreciated that. And again, this is a free service for licensees, a free service for the BSRB. They do make money off of optional services that people can sign up for. And so I haven't heard any real feedback from people who have signed up for the paid services, but any kind of feedback would be helpful for us to receive. So I thought I'd just provide a few.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I thought I saw Iris unmute. Did you have a comment, Iris?
Yeah, I was just curious too, but you had kind of addressed it. I was curious if you had any kind of statistics on how many people had been using it, or if they in doing kind of the audits, if you were able to utilize that yet.
Yeah, we don't have it built in quite like we envisioned as an endpoint. I think the method that we envisioned was to fully incorporate it into our license renewal system, so that when someone goes to renew their license, they'd be able to click a button to see if everything has been uploaded in CE Broker. We haven't been able to get that part linked up yet. But aside from that, it's sort of been one that if someone is selected for audit, we can look to see, are they in CE Broker, and then we can verify. And so I will ask them about that. Currently right now, we don't have any numbers in terms of people who have signed up for it, at least not from, I think at the very beginning, they gave us some preliminary numbers, but it's been several months. So I'll collect those and I'll provide an update to you next time and let you know. And I'm hopeful that one of the things that the board really did want to stress is that this is an optional type of a thing. I think that the board wants to make sure people have a choice. And if for whatever reason they wouldn't want to pursue this, I think the board wanted to allow them to do that. There are some states that made it a mandatory process and everybody had to use CE broker. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I'll bring back some numbers and some data and try to let you know how things are going with that.
So I'm curious if anyone other than myself has used that.
I have.
Okay. Did you guys want to comment on your experience?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just renewed in May and I felt like did take me a little bit longer than I had hoped to upload things into CE Broker. Some things that we're able to get historically on like an educational transcript, for example, 30 individual hours that are all 1 week apart from each other for like a grand round series or something. Instead of having those on one sheet, you had to upload each CE individually and label it. And so there was definitely I'd say it took about 4 times the amount of administrative time to renew through CE Broker. I do feel like that my documentation and my ability to go back and access that information will probably be enriched by it being out there and available. I typically get more continuing education than is required. What I found in CE Broker is when you hit the max that was required for our license, it told me I couldn't upload anymore. And I always like to have a few backups, like, yeah, this one covers ethics, but then I've got 3 or 4 others that will also cover ethics. And it made me anxious that it wouldn't let me upload more than the 60. And so that prompted me to pay for the paid version of CE Broker so that I could access additional functionality from the app and take advantage of some of the other things it offers to help me break even on that administrative time. I think it'll hopefully get easier every 2 years. Iris, how was your experience?
Yeah, it was the same because I had signed up and then I had all these CEUs, so it took a lot of time to put them all in at once. So I was like, it'll definitely help to break that up as I go and definitely do it as I go versus trying to do large chunks of them because it did take a while to save them and put them in individually.
I would add too, I think it's awesome because I don't have to worry about storing it on like my computer anymore. It's just there, which is really great. But I would say the same thing that Lauren said. It's not super user friendly. If you take like a 70-hour course, which I did, then I had to break it up in like a bunch of things instead of just saying like, here's 70 hours that I did, so that was a little not user friendly, but it's free. It stores all my stuff, so I'm not, but if you want some feedback for them, so.
I love it. I've used it for both my licenses. The only thing I'm struggling with now is that the CE cycle, since mine's just renewed end of May, like it hasn't started over for June, or my other one ended end of March, and so it hasn't started over. And so I can't add any new ones because it says it's outside of the CE cycle. And I don't know if that's an automatic process or maybe that's user error on my part. Could totally be. But I'm struggling with how do we get to that next CE cycle so I don't have to upload them all at once. I could upload them when I do them, which is something that I would just like to do. So.
Yeah, I've used it as well. Found it a little wonky in the beginning, in particular, trying to get things loaded. But once I kind of figured it out, made it easier. And plus, to Josh's point, I didn't have to remember where the file was, where I was putting all the copies of CEUs. So it's great that many people on the advisory committee have used it. Appreciate the feedback.
For those of you who hold more than one license, I thought I remembered hearing that some people, they had hoped that there would be a way they could upload it once and then just click that they had a different license and it would already be over there for the other license. But from what I recall hearing, it sounds like that's not an option, that you have to go in and manually upload it for each license type. Is that experience too? Okay.
But it gets easier every time. It's a lot easier now than when I first was trying. So I think it was just getting used to it.
That's good. I was going to say, now that I think about it, one of the comments that I did hear from people too, it sounded like if there was an issue, there really wasn't maybe live support or at least someone that you could call. Now, if you are audited, you do have some extra benefits. They did put that into place. So if someone is audited, they're able to use some of the services that would traditionally be under the paid services to help them out during the time they're being audited. But then they would go back to the free or the regular services outside of the audit. So, but that is very helpful. I took some notes when you all were talking, and when we have that meeting with CE Broker, I'll go ahead and bring up some of those things and see if those are things that they could help us with, or if there's things that are maybe just out of our hands. But we'll definitely bring them up and see if there can be some improvement in those areas.
Will we know, like, I mean, for the next cycle, I'm just looking at mine right now, and like I said, mine expired, or my license renewed in March, and so that CE cycle's done, and so I should be able to like report the new stuff, but it says it's outside of that time period. Will it automatically do that, or does that like the state has to report that?
Well, so I think one of the things that we're trying to work on too, we spend a lot of time working with CE Broker to help them understand our traditional CE requirement for license renewal in that model. Recently, though, we started a new license type, which is a special 6-month temporary reinstatement license. It was something that we were able to get in law a couple of years ago. So if someone has an expired license and it's been a while since they practiced and they want to begin practicing again, one of the requirements is you need the CEs from the, you had to take CEs sufficient for one cycle within the last 2 years. And so for people that fall into that category, it's difficult for them to upload things from a prior time period. So we're going to ask them, is there a way that there can be more flexibility with people being able to upload things to different time periods? Because I think that would be able to solve that for that group, but also solve it for our current licensees too. And I'm sure probably what it was is I'm sure they were trying to put in some controls to make sure that people didn't upload it into the incorrect time period, or think that it would count towards a future cycle if it wouldn't be in that cycle. But I'll ask them if there's maybe a tool they can authorize for our licensees so that they can add it to a different time period. Well, continue to, no problem. Continue to work with the e-broker. We'll probably revisit this topic again. If we find that there's still quite a few licensees that have not started doing CE broker, we'll continue to kind of push, because I think it is a nice service. And then we'll try to work out some of the logistics. In terms of some other updates, I'll turn to the board meeting that took place just about a month ago. It was May 12th. And at that board meeting, the board had a presentation by an individual named Bradley Guy. He's a business development manager for a company called EBOS, Ethics for Public Protection. A lot of the work the board does in the BSRB is on licensing, but we also have responsibility to investigate complaints against practitioners. And what the representative from this company offers to licensing boards is another tool for disciplinary bodies. And that would be, they facilitate things like papers and examinations for individuals that have struggled in a certain area to provide this as a resource for, let's say, the disciplinary body for the BSRB. If someone was found to have a violation and we were working on a consent agreement order, right now some of our available tools that we can utilize are things like supervision or a fine or public censure or suspension. And what this would also allow would be something where an individual could work with this group and work through some of these topics, and it would be more of a learning experience, similar to if you had continuing education required in a certain area, but a little bit more intensive. And so the board received certain information from that speaker. And I think the board will have to have a conversation at a future meeting if they'd like to authorize this for the complaint review committee for the board. but that was another resource for the board if the board wanted to use that in the future. There were also some updates from some of the mid-year meetings for the psychologists. There was an update from the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. And one of the things I wanted to update you on that, I serve on a couple different committees for that group. One of them is looking at the bylaws for their association. Last year, you may recall there was a lot of discussion about the EPPP and whether there would be a requirement of a second test, the EPPP2. And this was relevant for both the licensed psychology, but also for the master's level psychology, because the thought process is that if this was implemented for one group, they would want to make it a requirement for any states that were licensed at the master's level as well. And so thankfully, we were able to have additional discussions with the board for that association, and ultimately they reversed their decision and decided not to make that a requirement, but they did want to start a task force that has been meeting this spring on integrating some of the concepts from that second test into the EPPP. And I think their goal is to have something either in late 2026 or maybe late 2027, where the EPPP would be changed and it would be integrating both of the concepts. The way it's been explained is that the EPPP or the existing EPPP, they might call it Part 1, would be more of a knowledge-based test. The EPPP2 would be more of a skills-based test or an application type test. And so they're hoping to combine concepts of both into one examination. And right now that task force is meeting. Similarly, because of all of this coming to a head, it really exposed that the bylaws for that association needed some changes and updates. And so I'm serving as a member of the bylaw committee that is meeting this spring and summer to propose changes to the bylaws. And I've probably met with those groups about 3 or 4 times. We've gone through a lot of the old language. It has not been updated in at least 11 or 13 years. So we're making some positive changes, making sure that the associations that provide services to us, we're also providing services back to, so that's good. And I also serve on a research committee for that association as well. When people request information or research from that association, they have a group that decides how to handle those types of requests. So I sit on that group as well. David Stevens was able to attend that meeting with me as well. And so I apologize for not giving you the heads up, David, but did you have any comments you wanted to share from that mid-year meeting for ASPPB?
It was a really interesting meeting, and there are a lot of pretty chewy topics that they're dealing with, and it's really I think works amazingly for Kansas that David keeps his fingers on the pulse of those things, and they clearly value his feedback and input, especially given how Kansas has kind of dealt with some of these issues already that other states are really grappling with. So, I think we both get to contribute and gain a lot of value from that engagement.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying those kind words, and I was invited to speak on a couple different topics at the conference as well. One of the panels that I spoke on was a composite board, and there were 3 different perspectives from different states. One of the states has an independent board. One recently changed to more of something called an umbrella type structure, where you have independent boards, but they still report up to another body, and it's that body that makes the real official decision. In Kansas, we've had a composite board. The BSRB has existed as a composite board since 1980. So it's an unusual structure compared to some of the other states, but it's been functioning really well, in my opinion, for a long time. And so I was able to speak about how we do things in Kansas, and also some of the ways that we make things work, like utilizing the advisory committees. And so I was able to share some of that information, and it was well received. And the other topic that I was asked to speak on was public service. And what I talked about there was the different outreach that the board does in terms of speaking to different groups, posting things on the website, having the YouTube channel. And I even talked about the survey and went into some of the survey results through that. And that was mostly well received. There was one individual who questioned the survey and whether regulatory bodies are the right people to be collecting information and helping out in that way. And I think those are valid questions to ask. I just think, when we're dealing with topics like workforce, and issues like that, I think we can all be a part of the conversation and all part of the solution. And if there's things that are outside of our jurisdiction or our control, at least we can collect good information that can be helpful for other people to maybe carry forward as well. So received a lot of positive feedback from those presentations, and happy to be continuing to work with ASPPB. In terms of some other updates from that board meeting in May, one of the major items the board is working on currently is a review of the unprofessional conduct regulations. You may recall we've had a lot of work on these regulations. Each of the advisory committees was asked to do a thorough review and come up with recommendations on changes. And then those changes were forwarded back to the advisory committees to see what other groups had recommended for their regulations. And so I want you to know that this is not something that has been forgotten, but what we have done is we've taken all of those recommendations for all the different advisory committees, and working with members of my staff, we have created a giant grid of all of the unprofessional conduct regulations across all 7 professions. And as much as we were able to do so, we lined up each specific item next to the other items that were similar for the other professions. So that way the board can see, do you want to have standardized language for this item, or is there a reason why you would want this to be separate? And then for the items where maybe there is an unprofessional conduct regulation that deals with some of the psychological testing, is that an item that should just be for certain professions based on their scope of practice? Or do you want to have more of those that are across the board between the professions? So it's been a really good discussion. The board has had some really thoughtful conversations about some of the items that have been reviewed, and I think this will be something that the board will be working on through the end of the year. The goal is to finish the review, make recommended changes, and then to submit those through the process. But I think that's been a major ask of the board, and the board is definitely doing good work in that area. So the grid that I talked about is posted on the BSRB website. You're welcome to take a look at that. But I did want to compliment the board on all the work they're doing in that area. And I think by the end of this process, we'll really have a nice set of unprofessional conduct regulations that'll be much, it will be clear and helpful for licensees and also members of the public to understand sort of what are the responsibilities of professionals in this area. For some of you on the advisory committee, we had reached out in the spring to see if you were coming upon the end of a term. We asked if you were interested in seeking reappointment to the advisory committee. And I just wanted to let you know at the May board meeting, the chair of the board also reappointed several individuals to a new 2-year term. For this advisory committee, that was Rebecca Jabara, Bruce Johnson, Lauren Luck, Robert Pedroza, and Jennifer Schreiner. So happy to work with you all for another couple of years. And for individuals who do still have remaining time available to serve on the advisory committee, if you didn't come up this year, your term will come up next year. And so we'll reach out to you in the spring and check in with you then to see how everything was going. I think with that, you'd also have some recommended changes for the board in terms of adjustments to your education regulation, KAR 102-4-5A, master's level psychology regulation. There were some similar changes for a marriage and family therapy regulation. So I wanted to let you know the board did review those and did approve the recommended changes. So that is going to be moving forward as well. So with that, I think I will end my report and see if you have any question over any of the items I talked about or any other topics that might involve operations or work with the board of the BSRB.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? I did want to add a follow-up comment to the unprofessional conduct. It's been, I think, really useful to be able to look at those side by side. And one of the things we're trying to do is to make the language more consistent. It makes it easier for the BSRB staff when they're doing kind of follow-ups to be able to help direct complaints and or questions. If there's more consistency, it's just easier than if each of the professions has different specific language for each of the pieces under that. So kudos to Dave and his staff. They've really worked hard on that. In the interest of time, Dave, I see we're about 20 minutes out. I wonder if it makes sense to table old business unless there's some reason for us to do that, make sure we get our new business handled.
Yeah, and Dave, did you need to end the meeting at 2 o'clock or?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I thought there were people who were getting off, and then David Stevens indicated he wasn't going to have to, so we're okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to go to whichever items. I just want to make sure I had a good understanding there. So.
No, we're good. So we'll move to old business then, and continued review and discussion on the draft survey.
Yes. So you received a copy of the survey last meeting in April, and or the survey report. We had provided the surveys to licensees, held it open for about a month between January and February, collected a lot of information for the master's level psychology profession. We collected information from 236 individuals overall, which was a great response rate. It was 37.7%. For the master's level psychologist, it was a response rate of 32.1%. And for licensed clinical psychotherapist, it was a response rate of about 44.9%. So I feel pretty confident in saying that your profession had the best response rate of all the licensed professions. So thank you for responding to the survey and for encouraging others to do that. We have a lot of information, and I think you recall we said we had done this for all but one of the professions, and that is not to exclude any profession, but we have previously done surveys of the social work profession. We did one in 2021 and also one in 2024. And so since we had recently done one for that profession, this was a little bit different. But, in collecting all this information, there were different questions asked on this survey compared to the one we did recently for social workers. So when I speak to that group next week, I think I'm going to encourage them, if they are open to it, to have maybe a shorter survey that just deals with some of the new information that we had collected for the other professions, so that we can collect those from the social work profession as well. I think it would be really nice if we could, we said one of the goals for this process is to have a nice survey report for each profession, but also be able to compare across all the professions. And so we can collect some additional information from the social workers, we would be able to include all 7, and I think that would be nice. But at the last advisory committee meeting in April, we went through the survey report, and the draft report is 75 pages. We think we went through the first maybe 20 or 25 because we tried to organize it differently this year. As we're, learning how to do surveys in a better way, we're really trying to focus on summary information while also giving people the data and encouraging them to look into the data so that you can see the specific responses people provided. But I don't want you to get lost in the report either, because I know that 75 is a lot of pages, and I know that for some other professions, they were over 100 once you attach all of the responses as appendices. So I do think there's a lot of good information here. The question is how best to approach this as an advisory committee. At the last advisory committee meeting, I asked you to continue to look through the responses and to review the report. We did walk through a lot of the questions together, but my hope is that the results that we have here will drive some of the work of the advisory committee going forward. I think that there are certain questions in particular that would make sense for us to maybe dedicate a little bit of time at a future meeting to diving into more specifically. One of those questions you may recall towards the end of the survey, basically it asked directly, given the public protection mission of the board, do you have any recommendations on ways the BSRB could protect and serve consumers of services offered by BSRB licensees? And we got a lot of response to that. We had 88 master's level psychologists and 94 LCPs provide responses to that. And I think, that goes directly to the work of the board and also to the advisory committee. So I think that could be a good one to look into on a deeper level. There's also a question that asks, do you currently use artificial intelligence in your practice? And if you do, in what areas do you use AI? And so 106 master's level psychologists answered that question, and 119 LCPs answered that. We certainly have a lot of information to look into as that. We also asked questions about supervision and telehealth. And then we had, a nice handy catch-all question at the end that said, do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for members of the advisory committee to receive when evaluating possible recommendations for changes to the statutes and regulations for the master's level psychology profession? So I'll open it up because I do want to hear your thoughts now that you've had a little bit more of an opportunity to review the responses. And I'd like to hear kind of if you have recommendations or thoughts on how you think the advisory committee can continue to study this and have conversations about it. But those are a few questions that jumped out to me towards the end that I thought it would be easy for us to focus on one or two of those at future meetings, maybe one or two at a time, and dig into a little bit deeper. But I'll turn it over to all of you, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion. I'd like to hear your thoughts now that you've had a chance to look into some of this information.
I can start if that's okay with everybody. I did go through it because I find it fascinating just to read responses, and I think there's a lot of people with very similar complaints about the license itself, the name of the license, being on board with insurance companies. I feel like there were a lot of very similar things that they were wanting information on, but what stuck out for me was a piece of the supervision and the license itself, and it's it's made me reflect a little bit back, and I was trying to look through our old minutes to find when we talked about this. And Dave, maybe you'll remember when, but when we talked about people that have other license, like the EDS, the school psychologist that are applying for the LMLP license and that process. You guys know I work in the school district with about 60 EDS professionals, and I'm getting flooded with questions about that. And some of them are getting temporary LMLP. And the word on the street is that they're just going to do their regular jobs because there's a clinical person in the building, and then that will count for their clinical supervision. And I'm concerned. I'm not quite sure. I feel like we talked about this a few months ago. I don't know if does anybody else remember this conversation?
I do.
Do you remember how did we come up with a resolution with supervision for other, like, I don't want to stop them from getting it, but I also don't want them to think if I'm hanging out with a doctor, then after a couple years I'm a doctor. Like, I'm just worried that they're not, because
Yeah.
then if you go through the survey that he sent us, a lot of those other comments were about, well, I don't have enough training on this or on that. And I'm thinking, are we being super careful on the clinical supervision? Because I feel like if you do it in a way that works for your profession, you're going to get the training that you need, or at least the access to the training that you need, or the knowledge to know how to get or what questions to ask. So I don't know. Josh, maybe you can help me with this, but I am overwhelmed right now with the amount of EDS professionals that are applying for or obtaining a temporary LMLP, thinking that they can get their clinical supervision through their current role. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I do remember talking about it. I don't think we came up with any. I think it was a very brief. I remember it being a very brief conversation where you
Okay.
kind of acknowledged that we have seen that
Mhm.
start to happen. But I think you bring up a great point. I just don't remember talking about kind of that supervision dynamic.
And maybe that's a Leslie question. Did we change some of the verbiage on the regulations for the clinical supervision? I can't quite remember. Or is it simply up to the clinical supervisor to say yes or no, this is appropriate supervision? I'm not sure.
Well, we do have a staff member whose position is primarily to review the training plans that are received. And they go through and they look to see, who is serving as their supervisor and what type of work they'd be doing. But along this topic, I was just thinking maybe it'd be helpful to have that member of my staff come to a future advisory committee meeting
Okay.
about that process. Her name is Tyla, and she does some other work for the agency as well as a licensing specialist, but that is her primary responsibility. She keeps track of all the training plans that come in and works with people as they do amendments and approvals. And so I think she might be a good person to talk to that topic.
Yeah, because going through that survey, there's a lot of people that are saying, supervision in of itself could be pricey, which I get. And a lot of times if you within like the school district, they'll just do it as a part of their, I mean, they're not going to charge extra. So I get that aspect, but and then also the access to the education and not feeling like they have enough education or training on certain things. Well, and I just feel like, well, if you have a good clinical supervision experience and you're like, I'm just worried that an EDS will become an LMLP with zero clinical experience, I guess is my concern.
Well, they can definitely become an LMLP, right? I mean, it's whether they become an LCP or not. To be an LMLP, you just have to pass the test.
Well, I think they still have to get the supervision hour. Oh,
Well,
not
they
sure.
have to be supervised, but they don't have to, you don't have to report a plan. You only have to submit a plan to the state, David, right? If you want your LCP.
Oh, gotcha.
Otherwise,
You're right.
otherwise you pass the test, you're required to do supervision, and you can do that indefinitely without the state ever really knowing what plan you have or
But
what.
then you're saying that like the LMLP, then if she goes from EDS to LMLP, it's possible that she has no like clinical internship if she has a supervisor
Well,
with a
I think the only
clinical.
gatekeeping, and again, is like, whoever is approving that, they had to get approval to get the TLMLP or
Mhm.
or some, they had to get that approval. So at some point, whatever internship they did had to be approved by the BSRB as saying you meet the requirement for the TLMLP or
And do you
LMLP.
remember, is that based on their coursework from their from their previous program? Do you remember? I can't remember how that all works for the temporary LMLP.
Temporary just means that you haven't passed the test, right? Right,
Mhm.
David? So like it's all the same stuff, you just haven't passed the test. So
Okay, so she could go from EDS, just pass the test and get the LMLP is what you're thinking?
yeah, if she gets
Okay,
approved by the state, the
gotcha.
PSRB for the license, then if she passes the test, she'll be an
Yeah.
LMLP and she could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's horrible or bad. I'm just trying to understand the process because I'm getting a little inundated with questions from EDS people and from the people higher up that are saying, is this appropriate? Is this correct? And I don't know how to answer it. So, um,
Yeah, it's a
I
bigger
understand. Oh,
it's
sorry.
a bigger issue, I think. I mean, I know this is beyond our scope and whatnot. I think EDSs need to lobby to have some sort of license they can practice. I think it's silly that they can't practice outside of the school with some of their expertise in testing, but so they're trying to find a way to do that, that's and this is an avenue to do that. It's just doesn't quite fit for everybody in what they've gone through educationally. So
My recollection would be that the program that they went through and the classes they took and the practicums to the school would have to match what the state requires in order to get the LMLP. But that would be it unless they were going for the LCP.
okay, thanks. Sorry if that was a little off topic. When I was reading through some of those survey questions, it felt like this is kind of relevant now as to what some of these complaints were with supervision issues, finding the right supervisor, being um, in the correct setting with the supervisor, and then the training opportunities or education that they feel that they have or don't have. So I feel like there were a lot of very similar things that were listed on that survey.
It's a good time to be talking about changes because there is the sort of an evolving process of master's level psychology in general. There's kind of a push to have more states create license structures for master's level psychology. And when it comes to education, especially working in a school setting, I think, you school psychologists fall under the Department of Education, whereas in some other states, it may not be under education, it may be under the licensing board for psychologists. And so there is a little bit of a difference there too, in terms of where things fall versus compared to some other states. And not to mention, there's also the evolving, um, you know, uh, review of programs at the master's level for accreditation now that the APA started looking at accrediting master's level programs. And so there's a lot of things that are moving around and changing. And I think one of the questions that we've asked, and I think is still a little unresolved, is the scope of practice for master's level psychology going forward. You know, what things are envisioned when you have an accrediting body for some of the other professions. There's generally a license type that is recognized in a lot of other states, where if a program is accredited by this accrediting body, we're thinking of this eventual license type. But with master's level psychology, only 17 states license the master's level. There's not the uniformity. I think the same thing we're encountering a little bit with the addiction counseling profession, where not all states license addiction counselors. Some do certification, some are registered. The terminology is different. And so trying to make improvements in all areas, but it gets complicated. So I appreciate you bringing up those comments. I will also have a conversation with Leslie and then maybe see if she can come to a future meeting and weigh out some of those things as well. Any other thoughts about the draft survey report? Or maybe a plan going forward and how the advisory committee can maybe take a lot of this information and kind of focus on reviewing it and you know, moving forward with some good discussions where it's maybe not as difficult to analyze 18 separate questions and thousands of responses.
Well, Dave, I can say that in regard to like some of the questions around the EPPP and having to wait to take that, and I think we've fixed that issue. And then there were people who talked about, if you can't pass the EPPP, is there another way to get the clinical level of licensure? And I know we're going to talk about kind of different pathways to licensure later, but I was glad to see enough references to that it was something we could point to when we said, here's why we're looking at these things.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions that we asked about on the survey too, we are a little unique in Kansas in that we have tiered licensure for certain professions that may not be tiered in other states. They may have one level of permanent license, but a certain time where you have to work to get to that point. And if you don't get to that point within the time period, you just have to stop practicing in that area, which seems a little strange to me, but I'm also used to our system. So for professions like marriage and family therapy and professional counseling, we have a level that is not independent, where you do still have to practice under supervision, but we had a path for people to reach the clinical level and the independent level, and a lot of people do, but people could stay at the non-clinical level for their entire career. And I think that's a little unique. And so one of the questions we did ask was, are you actively taking steps towards reaching the independent level license? And if you're not, why are you making that decision, or why is that the case? And so I think some of the responses to that are very interesting.
There was somebody made a comment about changing a suggestion about changing the LMLP license and had a different acronym, like I can't even remember what it was. It was a little more of a mouthful, but license, clinical, master's level. I'm missing something. But I don't know if it was for insurance purposes or what. Did anybody else catch that? And I wonder if that was.
Yeah, I just read it.
Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, I just read it. Instead of having, I always thought it was kind of weird too that we have an LMLP and then an LCP, and psychotherapy. It's like, what is that? You know, and then it's like everybody else just throws the clinical word in there. So they were suggesting doing a licensed clinical master level psychologist instead of an LCP. So
That's far more intuitive than current state, but it feels like there's a lot of history connected to the usage of the word psychologist in the master's level psychology.
I can say that when I'm on other boards, I don't like saying out my, licensed clinical psychotherapist doesn't really sound, I don't know.
Yeah, it feels more hoaxy and
Yeah,
less
it sounds a little hoaxy. Yeah, like it's
less
like,
scientific.
yeah, it's like, it's a little outdated.
I agree. I will be vulnerable and honest, for the first decade of my career, that was the primary reason I didn't think I ever wanted to pursue my independent license. If I didn't need it and it was going to change my title to something I didn't really identify with, I couldn't figure out the reason to do it. It wasn't until I wanted to be able to say I could practice independently, but that changes in people. People might not be in a situation where they need to practice independently. So we want to make sure there's some thought that it's not just the name that would keep people from continuing to grow.
There's also a reason for one of the unique things for some of the professions with tiered licensure. Once you accrue hours or pass the relevant test, whatever the requirements are to move to a different license level, it makes your previous license obsolete. But for master's level psychology, the board has allowed individuals to maintain both licenses. And I think part of the reason for that, from at least what I have been told based on the history, is that the clinical level license doesn't use the word psychology. And so it is helpful to have that as a master's level psychologist, because there is psychology in the name versus the clinical psychotherapy. Now, I also did a little research, I think probably about a year into my position here with the board. I went back and looked at some of the legislative history when the clinical level license was created. And so I know that there was a lot of testimony and there were strong positions all around what name should be used. And so I'd be happy to go and find that memo and then provide it to all of you so you have a little bit of the history of that too. That there is some actual minutes from meetings, but if I recall correctly, I think I tried to summarize that down to just a few page memo and provide it to the board. So I'd be happy to bring that to a future meeting or share that with you all.
I think that'd be cool, David. I'm curious if you recall your interpretation of that, and maybe you just need to go refresh your memory, but I wonder if the same sensitivities that were being expressed then, if you think those would translate to current state. Because it seems to me like there have been, some pretty big changes in the last, however long it's been, that, might impact how people feel about it now.
I would point though, however, to the APAs, even when they're looking at credentialing master's programs, what they're calling them generally doesn't have psychologist or psychology. The APA has been very protective of that particular term over the years. Way back in the day when I started, we were not even licensed. And then we started as registered master's level psychologist, I think.
I agree with those things. The one thing that doesn't make sense is that we could be an LMLP, but not an LC. Like you could still add the word,
Sure.
the C or the clinical, because the word's in the master's level title. That part I think is what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, my
'Cause you
memory.
could still be a licensed master's level clinical psychologist, so that you're including the word master's, so no one's presenting to be a doctor, but then also use the word clinical, so it's clear that person's has their.
My memory,
Independent.
and I could certainly be wrong, was that it was the fact that you could hang out a shingle and do independent practice and call yourself a psychologist, that the doctoral level people were trying to keep from happening. So that's how they ended up with the psychotherapist term.
That's right.
I know it was really very shocking to me when I came back to Kansas, because in California, that would have never been able, even psychotherapists is so tightly controlled on who can be called that or referred to it, or a psychologist, or even if you have that master's level, you could get into a lot of trouble with it. And so seeing that those were the licensures here, it was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I don't know if that plays a role into it as well, like other states and how they react to the titles.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the conversations at a national level, because in a lot of states that license, I would say master's level psychologists. Some people would say psychology at the master's level, or the terminology is all over the board. Some would say you need to use the term technicians or assistants or different things like that. And in stepping into this role, there were already 7 professions, and I do my best to assist all 7 professions. And so it's interesting just to have a composite board compared to some of the discussions by the independent boards. And so, but I can tell you that some of the comments I've heard at a national level, at least from PhD level, licensed psychologists, some of the comments I have heard them make is that they are concerned there could be confusion by members of the public, that if you had a psychologist compared to a master's psychologist, members of the public might think a master's psychologist would be higher than a psychologist. Now, I think we define it, or at least use terminology that is helpful when we say master's level psychologist, which master's degree is what we're really pointing to most of the time with that terminology. But at least those are some of the statements that I have heard, is that they are concerned that there might be confusion, and that people might think a master psychologist would be a higher level or a higher position than a psychologist.
I don't think the public has any idea on this type of stuff. And I say that because, like, when I'm working with whether an individual or a parent or a family or whomever, sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, hey, doc," and I say, "Not your doctor, not a doctor." Over and over. How many times do I say that to someone who walks in? Or they'll say, "Well, you're my psychologist, not a psychologist." Like, I don't know that they understand the differences between a lot of these, an LP or a PhD or an LCP or a LCP or LPC. I mean, they have, I, I
Yeah, we're
understand that
alphabet. We're
we are,
alphabet
I
soup.
understand that it's like we don't want to confuse them, but they don't know. Even if I tell them over and over, I cannot prescribe medication. I'm not a PhD. I'm not, they will say, okay, whatever, doc. I mean, it's just, I don't, it's hard.
I
I
think it's
do
more of an
think we've
internal thing too. Like a layperson, I don't think would know the difference between psychiatrist and psychologist. I bet you can
correct.
get like 50%. It's more internal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like we
Yeah.
want to.
And I get like clarifying that this is my degree, but even after that, they're not listening. So
Yeah, I think to the public, we're very much alphabet soup. I know, though, if we waited to start educating and making physician assistants a licensable, billable thing until we were sure that the general population wouldn't confuse a physician and a physician assistant because they share one same name. Like that could go into advanced practice, nurse providers. Like there's so many things out there to compare to, and so many ways of educating our patients, whether that's outside of a shingle or in the middle of an integrated practice. It seems like there's other ways we could educate the public and make it less confusing.
I have another thing to bring up if that's okay. Are we okay to do that?
Mhm.
One of the comments on here, something to think about for the future. Are we still sharing about we're still sharing about the survey, right?
Survey. Yeah.
I thought this one was really interesting. I don't know what page it's on, but numerous private practice locations around Wichita. I'm sure this happens in many other places. Use contracts that essentially seem to take away the client's ability to follow the therapist when they transition to new clinics. When I left one practice in particular, I had to tell my clients that I would need to transfer them to another clinician in that clinic. And if I were to get caught providing services to that client within a year of leaving the practice, I would have been sued. That seems unacceptable to me. I think that's a really good point. Um, I think that's a really interesting point. If our job is to protect the public, right? I think continuity of care is really important. And if organizations are not allowing that to happen, um, I know that's a sticky discussion, I think, and that gets into non-competes and things like that too. But um, I mean, I can share as a practice owner. I think, I mean, if someone leaves my practice and clients, I mean, I think it's important for clients to be able to follow that practitioner if they want to be able to do that. So I just think that's an interesting thing. I don't know if anyone else finds it
And
interesting.
I do think like since that non-compete clause at the federal level has changed, that will impact that a lot. Like they don't really have they can't say you can't do that without that non-compete clause.
Yeah.
Not legally anyways. But ethically, I agree.
It
They should
feels
be able
icky.
to, yeah, they should be, they have that therapeutic bond.
Mhm.
They
I mean,
need
you think about, I mean, there, of course, there's a spectrum, right? But if you have someone who really struggles and you've been seeing them for a couple of years, right, that seems ethically icky, like you said, to say, oh, sorry, I can't see you anymore, even though I'm going to be working across the street.
Yeah.
It seems like, is there, I don't know, how do you get organizations to be ethical? So like in psychiatry and psychology, we do not enforce or did not have a non-compete at the University of Kansas Health System. So patients and doctors are feel free to move about freely and take care of who they're supposed to. Is that not typical? I mean, for at master's level psychology levels, are we holding people to non-competes?
I feel like I can't speak to Wichita, but I hear about it more and more in like Kansas City area non-competes in private practices, especially. I think it's who regulates them except other therapists, you know.
Right.
I know I like in Wichita and Iris, I'm not sure if you're in Wichita too. Like I know I think Prairie View does that. Like you not makes you sign a non-compete if you leave, but a lot of people will just office in Derby or Wellington or like right out Andover, right outside. It's kind of the whole thing feels icky to me, but I don't know, Josh, about other private clinics that are doing that. It doesn't feel
Well, I know for a long time in Salina, the hospital was doing that, but they were also their area was like you could not compete within like 60 or 90 miles of any location that they have, which is like everywhere. And they did sue, like they would sue you and you would be caught up in court for 2, 3, 4 years, and spend a lot of money on it. And they just do that. And then that once you got close to the end of the resolution, they drop it and like walk away. So it wasn't really that they expected to win or wanted to win. It was just that they were going to tie you up.
Do you know, like, on what grounds? Like, if you talk about continuum of care for clients or having that therapeutic relationship, and it's best if they keep the person that they've been seeing, like,
Okay.
is it just more of a legal thing that
They were just doing off the legal non-compete. That was it.
Well, what I wonder is these must be profitable practices if people are not wanting you to take your unfavorable payer mix with you when you go. Maybe there's an element there that's really about revenue. Like it'd be
Yeah.
icky to fill yourself up with patients that are paying $200 cash an hour and then take your shingle and hang yours up. That's a little different than, and I don't think very many people would do that, but that might be what people are worried about. And then at the extreme looks like someone not letting people
I feel
leave.
like the same type of thing happens for interns. Like I have somebody who's a clinical intern. She's been seeing patients and telling them, I'm an intern, I'm under supervision. And then when she graduated, she's waiting to apply for licensure, but she's can't see her people right now because she doesn't have her license. But I don't it's confusing. Like, why couldn't you continue to see them? I think they can only charge like $20 an hour. I mean, it was a real low rate, which was good for the people coming in. She had a good 15 people coming in, but she can't see them. But I'm like, what's the difference? Why can't you still be? I don't know. The whole thing confuses me. Now they have to wait, months before she gets on paneled with license with insurance companies. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. What's the difference between being in class and not being in class with being under supervision? I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things that go on like that that maybe we're not aware of.
Well, part of that, and this is just speaking only like on the case you just mentioned, but
Mhm.
some of the schools, have a like liability insurance for their students. And so when they aren't in class
Oh, okay.
anymore, they
Yeah.
lose the coverage. So that isn't like a guarantee, but that
Oh,
could be
okay.
potentially for those particular cases why they are not allowing it, because certain amounts of
Okay.
coverage are no longer actually in place. And so it's a protective
Gotcha.
factor for the agency.
That's what I
Gotcha.
was
That makes
Perhaps.
sense. Yeah, just something I didn't realize, but she's like, my clients are just out of luck right now. I'm like, oh, that's hard, but that makes sense.
Although they should be covered by somebody. Yeah, I'm hearing more private practices doing that. I mean, we do not do any kind of compete clause. We did years and years ago, but we let that go a long time ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, because it just did not feel right. So,
There's also been some real effort to make non-compete clauses unenforceable, just
right.
at a more general level, not speaking specifically to the particulars of what you're speaking to, but I think those are very challenging to enforce
Mhm.
now, given at least the latest Department of Labor guidance from probably the Biden administration.
Mhm.
I think though there's still the deterrence factor is you're gonna have to pay a lawyer. Yeah, sure. I mean, you can't tell. Well, okay, I'm not a lawyer, so I won't speak to what you can. But I mean, you're telling clients who they can't see, like, sorry, you can't see that provider. Pretty sure you can't do that. You're telling people they can't practice within the state that they are licensed and perfectly. So it's civil, and that's fine. But I think it's the problem is it's not always about like I'm gonna win this case.
Mhm.
It's I'm gonna tie you up with legal fees,
Yep.
and you're gonna spend more money. That's the deterrence. It's
Mhm.
not. And yeah, obviously I'm not a fan, but I think that's the problem.
And that's
Is
what they were,
yeah,
yeah, that's what they were really doing here is like they knew they weren't even going to win a lot of these. They just didn't care. They were tying them up and I know one person that was a physician, but they spent almost $160,000 trying to fight this. And it's just like,
Yeah, then I guess my point is they might be able to take the non-compete before it becomes a dispute and go to the Department of Labor
mhm,
and ask for an opinion as to its enforceability.
yeah.
And that would cost nothing. They wouldn't have to even get an attorney to do that. And it might be sufficient to either get some direct comfort or scare off the
Mhm,
potential enforcer. Because what could happen is at this point, the Department of Labor might determine that it's an unfair business practice to even require having people sign those. So I guess that's what I'm saying is I think there's more leverage on the side of the person who signed the non-compete now than existed 6 months ago.
mhm.
I'm not a labor attorney. I'm an attorney. This is not my area of practice. Please do not take anything I've just said as legal advice. It is not.
Well, what can be done for like the comment that Josh read? Like, how do we reach out to somebody that's in that position or has that comment or question? Like, I feel like part of filling out the surveys, if I have this really concerning thought, I'm hoping to get something back. Is there a way that I don't know what the answer is or how to respond to? Like, we have like, how do we respond to the people that filled out that survey with those kinds of things saying, hey, this is a discussion, or I don't even know what the response would be.
I think that's part of the issue is if it doesn't fall under what the BSRB is designed to do,
Yeah.
we have to be very careful. Dave can speak to that about what we say in regard to those kinds of issues.
Yeah. And I know there were a lot of things that were like, I don't know if the BSRB can help with this, but, and then the insert complaint. So I didn't know if that was something that could be responded to or not.
Yeah, I don't know about a response. We can definitely kind of study the information that was collected and then see what areas we might be able to work on. Behind the scenes, we'll continue to clean up the report. Our goal is kind of to figure out ways in which the advisory committee can identify some things that maybe we can focus on. But once we have a nice report, we can continue to share this with other parties. And so we may not be able to help with some of these issues, but we can provide this to other groups and they can review it and may be able to pick up the baton and take some of these things that we don't have authority or jurisdiction over potentially.
Would it ever fall under like an ethical or professional issue where they're preventing care to a client by stating they cannot have access? Like if it's let's say like it's a community mental health center or things like that, or private practice, and these people are licensed, would that ever then, because like fall underneath that?
That's where I was going with it. I wasn't suggesting I know we don't have any jurisdiction over private entities, but from an ethical practicing standpoint and the public, it seems like if there's not some mechanism for a clinician to say, hey, this person's really struggling, it's in their best interest. I continue to work with them. That seems like an ethical issue.
Yeah, and we're kind of crossing some I don't know, not crossing boundaries or lines. We're just kind of dealing in a lot of different areas here in this discussion, which is a good discussion. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of, it feels to me like it's something that someone might talk about as like a legal defense or something like that. And that's a little bit outside of what we would usually be working with. It sounded similar. We've had a couple of instances where there was someone who let their license expire but continued to see patients. And at least one individual in that case, brought up the argument, well, my license wasn't active, it wasn't authorized to practice, but for the good of the clients, I continued to see them. And it's like, well, I understand what you're saying, but are you the only person who could continue to see that person? You have a responsibility to follow the laws that concerns your own license. And if you're not licensed to practice, you're really not supposed to be providing services. And so it feels like it's something that someone might raise, and it's a good question to ask. Some of these things legally are probably a little outside of what we can handle, or even things that we might give advice to people, because it might cross over into an area like legal advice. And we generally say we can't provide guidance on that or offer legal advice, but you may benefit from talking to your own legal counsel as it relates to some of these issues. So it does touch upon the areas that we work with. It's just some of these things may be a little bit outside of what we could control. But
So,
discussion.
David, I'm not nearly close enough to where Kansas law would be on this, but just knowing the little that I feel like I've picked up about the federal level attention that was drawn to the non-compete issue, I guess what I'm hearing from Joshua is, to the extent that another licensee or entity is creating private law that is potentially constraining access to care, which is a non-compete. Like, I don't think that's the equivalent of someone saying, well, I want to see this patient even though my license is termed. That's an obstruction that's being created by yet another regulated entity, I think and so to me, maybe it would be an interesting, I wonder whether or not it would be something that, like, you could ask an opinion from the Attorney General about, to say, is this impairing the public policy of, we want licensees to be able to practice, and we want licensees to be able to see their patients. And if another licensee is using basically private law mechanisms to constrain that, is there a public policy basis for an opinion on whether or not on the enforceability of those contracts? And I don't know that that would take a specific, for instance, as much as just this question of, I mean, this to me was the question that the Biden administration was trying to get at when they issued their regs last year, that basically said, we just generally don't think non-competes, outside of very limited circumstances are enforceable. But again, I'm way outside, coloring way outside of my lines here. But
It's
just
interesting because it's like a forced abandonment of your client. Like you do not have an option. Our ethical code is to not abandon. If you're signing a contract, you're like you don't have that option.
Well, the
this might be an
authority-
interesting question for our lawyer.
Yeah, I'll ask some more questions about this in between this meeting and the next meeting. Ultimately, the advisory committee would have the ability to make a recommendation to the board. So continue to think about this. It can be maybe something that we revisit at a future meeting and see. But I'll continue to gather some information outside of the meeting and bring it back to you and just kind of let you know if I found out anything or have any more thoughts to share on this topic.
I have a question about overall, like the topics that were discussed in the survey results. I'm not sure if there was any similarities between any of the other surveys, like the social worker survey or counselor surveys. But I'm just wondering if there is, if it ever was thought through like a maybe like a newsletter put out for like all the groups to have some of the same information, if there was a concern, say this topic that we're touching base on, here's some information for them to review if they would like to do that, or some other like ethical, like, issues. I always find it interesting, looking through things about what are like the number 1 and number 2 ethical issues that were reported for that year. And I don't know if that's, I like data. So, but if that's helpful for the other, just licenses that are out there. And because I get a newsletter from my other license that I have, that's a national newsletter, and it's really helpful to see and hear about all the things that are happening from there. And I just thought across our state, if there's very similar issues that are going on, if that could be an option.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. I think the goal is we're going to be taking these reports and then cleaning them up just a little bit more. Although I can tell you, it's okay for us to continue to use these because I think they're probably close. There might be some additional edits and some additional cleanup, but it'll really be that comparison report across the professions that I think will have the information you're looking for. Once we have the final reports and we have those posted on the website, we're planning to send something out and thanking them for responding to the survey and letting them know they can access the reports. I think there's going to be a lot of good information, and so we might we have looked into doing newsletters. We haven't done those from the BSRB in a little while, but we've talked about it and we would like to launch that in the future. And that might be something that we could kind of highlight some of the information. There's too much probably to include in one, but we could probably pull a few things out and then highlight in a few of those. But the next step now is to make sure that we finalize these survey reports. And then once we have a final report, then we can direct people to it on the website. We've been a little hesitant to direct people to the draft reports just because we thought the final report will be nicer for people to review when it's kind of cleaned up a little bit more.
All right.
For the next meeting, if you don't mind, I thought we can continue this conversation. I could pull 2 questions and then maybe ask you just to focus on those 2 for some additional discussion. Seems like supervision was a topic that you had talked about, and on page, well, let's see, looks like that's page 19 of the report. It's question 15 for master's level psychology, question 16 for the clinical psychotherapist. It says, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? So maybe review the responses to that question. It has some summary information on that page, but if you could take a look at the specific answers. So look at question 15/question 16. And then maybe also look at question 13. Question 13 is on page 16, and it says, over the last 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing at the master's level psychology profession, could you share information on any practice-related negative issues you've seen, such as areas where practitioners appear to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? And maybe focus on those 2 questions. And then in future meetings, we can take a couple more questions, maybe focusing on AI and telehealth, and then maybe have another meeting where we talk about the public protection question and then the catch-all question. But maybe if we divide it like that, we can kind of stagger what you're looking at. We can really do some intensive focus on some of this information.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you for your comments and a good discussion on this topic.
That'll move us to a continued discussion on the regulation of artificial intelligence.
And I just have one note. This is an ongoing conversation, and I think when we talk about the survey results as far as artificial intelligence, that'll be helpful for this conversation. There's just one item I wanted to add, just to keep you aware. I continue to monitor news at the national and state level. I met with a group about 2 weeks ago from the Information Network of Kansas. They're offering certain resources to state agencies. They've helped us out with a payment portal on our website. They had a presentation where they were talking about conceptual ideas to help agencies. And one thing they talked about just briefly was artificial intelligence. I started asking them after the presentation if they had any available resources, but this is really more of a conceptual type thing. But it looks like some things they're at least thinking about are like the ideas of chatbots, where you might have FAQ sections on a website, but instead of having those page after page, you might take that information, feed it into a chat bot that could be more interactive and maybe helpful if someone is looking for specific information. So it doesn't exist yet, at least to my knowledge, but it's a resource we might look into. We have some prohibitions on what we can and can't use for artificial intelligence, but on a state level, at least people are having conversations about potential future use. And so at least in a very limited sense, that is one of the areas that might be beneficial in the future. That being said, on the national level, there's also, from what I understand, an appropriations bill that includes a provision that would limit states' ability to regulate artificial intelligence for a certain period of time. And I think it may be 5 years. And so I am definitely not an expert on tracking some of those things at the federal level. I'm just kind of reporting some of the information that I've seen and heard. If that were to go into effect, and I don't know the extent of how wide sweeping it would be, but if it is that comprehensive, it might, it would limit our ability to regulate artificial intelligence concerning licensees potentially. And I haven't seen the specific language of the provision, but if it is, states can't prohibit or regulate artificial intelligence for 5 years, then that doesn't mean we can't continue to have conversations or discussion, or that we should stop researching or talking about this topic. I just want you to know that is in play as well. So I'll keep you updated as I hear more information, but I think we should still continue to talk about this topic and prepare things that can move forward, and then we'll pivot if we need to based on the federal information.
All right. Any further comments on that? All right, Dave, that moves us to new business and a discussion recommendation on new advisory committee members.
Okay. Well, the advisory committee is currently full, but Carrie Wald is coming upon the end of a term and is not seeking reappointment to the advisory committee, but we really have enjoyed working with Kari, and if she would like to be considered in the future, I think it would be great to have you back on the advisory committee. But since you are stepping off the committee at the end of June, that opens up a position for another individual to serve in this capacity. And so we sent out a message to all master's level psychologists and licensed clinical psychotherapists. We received responses back from 3 individuals, and I provided their information to you. And then earlier today at the meeting, I provided a little bit of information about the geographic uh, information about the current members of the advisory committee. So in your packet of material, I also included a copy of the advisory committee policy. And that has some guidance in terms of as you review materials for applicants and have discussions in this process, as you are considering a new member for the advisory committee, again, your authority is to make recommendations. So if you feel comfortable recommending someone to the advisory committee, you can either see if there's consensus amongst yourself in terms of which of the three you'd recommend as a new member of the advisory committee. Ultimately, it would be the chair of the board who has authority to appoint to the advisory committee. But generally what happens from these meetings is there's discussion. If there's consensus or a vote, you could do it either way. Then that would get forwarded to the chair of the board. The chair of the board could consult with the chair of the advisory committee. In this case, they're one and the same. So we can kind of do that efficiently, but ultimately it's the chair of the board that has the authority to appoint. The advisory committee policy does say that when you're looking at new members, you should take certain things into consideration. And so it says in reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, ethnicity. Members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. So there's a lot of things you could weigh in considering members of the advisory committee, but we've provided some information there in the advisory committee policy. So what I've seen kind of work in the past has been that certain individuals, when discussing applicants, they start with saying if there was one particular person who stood out to them the most, and then other members kind of share their findings as well. And then if there's just a natural consensus, that goes well. At other times, sometimes individuals are highlighted and there's an official vote. It just can't be a secret ballot. So if there is a vote, it would need to be a vote where everyone can see how everyone is voting. But I'll turn it over to you so you can have some discussion about applicants for the advisory committee.
Anybody have an opinion they want to share?
Elizabeth Birch stood out to me. I thought the letter was very strong. Also in the liberal area, which was way down there, which would be good to have some representation. I don't think I tried to listen to where everyone was from earlier. I don't think we have anyone down there really. So that would be, am I wrong on that? Is anyone Southwest Kansas? No? No.
I thought she was southeast.
Liberal?
I'm looking
Thought
at
she
this
was
right.
liberal.
It says Caney. I don't know where that is.
Yeah,
I think that's
southeast.
southeast. Yeah.
Sorry.
Really small community though.
But
I thought, I thought I read liberal. I'm so sorry. I messed that up. I still think she's a really strong applicant. I liked her letter. I thought it was really strong. Just kind of the will. I mean, clearly very committed to the profession and whatnot, and has some really good experience. But so
Good experience and coming in with newer training too, which was neat too, just to have a viewpoint like that.
I found the circumstances that kind of led them towards getting some social work education too. I don't know. I feel like that would add a perspective that a lot, kind of having that dual education and academic experience will be a very unique perspective.
I liked how active she is in the community, not in the profession, but also in the community too.
Anybody else want to speak for one of the other applicants?
Um, don't know her personally, but I do know like Caitlin Reed is very active in our community here. She is from Salina though, so that's but she definitely has a lot of work with the foster care agencies, but she also does testing for the regular community as well and works with community corrections and just has kind of her hands in a lot of different things and then is always seeking new training and education. She does a lot of outreach.
Yeah, I was going to support that too. She definitely, being in child welfare, I directly I thought was a really great area of emphasis, and I saw that too, Sarah. She's definitely does a lot, has been part of a lot of outreach stuff. So.
Anyone else? As Dave mentioned, the recommendations that come out of the advisory committee then go to the board and ultimately are appointed by the chair. So as I'm in that position currently, I'm not going to weigh in at this point, and will just kind of follow the lead of the advisory committee.
I guess to make it official, I had Elizabeth as my top candidate.
She was my top pick of the three, but they all look like good candidates. But I liked her letter and I liked her the things that she's done. Some of her research and stuff seems like it would be help diversify our group a little bit.
I would agree. She would be my top pick.
And with her being where she's from, that would add a different representation geographically. Would it, I guess,
If it is a rural area, is it a rural? I mean, it's always
yeah,
good.
it's very rural.
Always good to have rural representation since it's typically underrepresented.
Yeah. Like I said, everybody has really strong, I think, but I like the fact that that would add a different representation as well.
I think they have trees in southeast Kansas too, which is nice. So
Yes.
someone who sees trees.
So the consensus of the group then? Anyone in disagreement? Dave, do we need a formal vote, or is consensus enough?
Consensus is enough. You can either take a formal vote, or if there's consensus, that's sufficient as well.
All right. Would appear like there is consensus.
And just for clarity for our note takers, there was consensus for Elizabeth Birch. Is that who you had selected?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll go ahead and we'll write up a letter just for the standardized process, and that'll just be the recommendation officially from the advisory committee. The next step would be an appointment at the board meeting, and they'll take place in July.
Very good. Okay, well, now we really are getting close to the end. Is it all right I'd like to move to just recognizing Kari and her participation on this advisory committee and thanking her for her the time she has spent and the input that she's provided, all of which have been extremely helpful, I think, to this committee. So, Gary, thank you. We wish you all the best. If there's anything you want to say, we would give you the opportunity to do that now.
Sure. I've really enjoyed sitting on the committee. I really appreciate being able to be involved and having a better understanding of, you know, what the BSRB does and what we do to help our professionals in the state and protect the clients we serve. It was hard to step down, but it's a good problem. I've got a lot of clinical work to do. And so, and it was without fail every time, every meeting. I've got somebody that needs to switch or shuffled. So for now, I'll step down, but I will definitely be open to reconsidering rejoining in the future, and I appreciate all the work that you all continue to do. It's very meaningful. And I think it's obviously integral for what we do as we serve the state of Kansas. So,
Excuse me.
Well, thank you, Kari. And I would definitely echo what Dave mentioned. Really enjoyed working with you on the advisory committee, and thank you for volunteering your time to serve so much. I really value your comments. And if you do decide to come back and serve on the advisory committee again, we'll look forward to working with you more in the future as well. So thank you.
All right, we can jump back to new business. Item B, discussion on alternative pathway for licensure. We've had discussions several times, obviously, about issues surrounding the EPPP, and I saw it was came up in the survey as well, and it led to a discussion Dave and I have had, and the board's had an initial discussion around talking about a alternate pathway to licensure, and the board ultimately decided to take it to each of the advisory groups, as some seemed really interested in thinking about that, and others maybe less so. So obviously this will be the first of probably several discussions we'll have about this, but thinking about if we were going to create a alternate pathway for licensure that would not require passing of the EPPP at a certain level, what other kinds of protections could we put in place to make sure that the people who went an alternate route still had the educational and practice foundations to be able to serve people in the community and provide good, safe, useful services. And so whether that would be like longer time under supervision, more supervision time, and then ultimately attestations required by supervisors. Those are the kind of things that we want to talk about with the advisory committee. Dave, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I do think it would be helpful to for you all to, we've talked a little bit about their 17 states that license at the master's level. So I'd like for you to be able to review some of the data from other states in terms of what they require for licensure. In terms of this conversation, there are other states that have had it for other professions. And I don't think we should ever be afraid to have a conversation about things that are complex or difficult or looking into. But there will be some things to weigh in this conversation. Right now, there's not a multi-state compact for master's level psychology, but potentially if there is, and we have a path to licensure that would be a little different than a lot of other states, it could potentially prohibit individuals' ability to practice in other states or be part of a compact, because a lot of the compacts are striving for uniformity of requirements for licensure. So I mean, that is something that I think we need to make sure that we're looking at what other states are requiring currently, and that you're familiar with the current requirements in Kansas as well. So I want to make sure you have good information for the states that currently license the master's level. Maybe we'll try to also provide some of the task force that are talking about master's level requirements in other states and look to see kind of what they're looking at in terms of what would be a requirement for licensure. But I want you to have good information so that you can review this and kind of weigh things in your discussion. So I will do some work behind the scenes and we'll prepare that for you so you can look at it at future meetings as this is a deep topic. It's a big conversation. But like I said, I don't think we should be afraid to have a conversation. We just want to make sure that we're collecting all the information and having an educated conversation about it.
Any initial thoughts on that, or are we ready to move on?
I've been thinking about it quite a bit, so I'll share my thought real fast, if that's all right. I think it's a great idea. David, the compact is, yeah, that's huge hurdle to, I think about. But that aside, I think the motivation for this conversation is there are, a good amount of practitioners, it feels like anyway, running into them more and more, it seems, who have their LMLP. They've had their LMLP for 15, 20 years. It seems sort of silly that they should have to be supervised as someone who's been in the field for 2 years. Um, so, so I've been toying around with numbers in my head on what that kind of looks like. So my thought was, it seems playing with like the 10-year mark is kind of where I keep coming back to and thinking about like someone who's had their license for 10 years, maybe have 8,000 hours of direct clinical practice, which would be, twice the amount of an LCP, well over twice. And then as Dave Anderson was talking about, some attestations and things like that from supervisors, but it just seems for me like around that I think it's important to have a direct clinical hour amount in there as well, because someone can have their LMLP and be an administrator right out of the gate, and it doesn't seem like they should be able to have their LCP after a certain number of years. And then, because what if they start practicing? They should probably have supervision, right? But someone who has years and a lot of clinical direct experience seems like they should be eligible. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree I mean, there's a lot of professionals out there that are in that certain situation. I would agree with that. I guess I'm a little confused on is the topic of lowering the score. I know on the survey there were some comments about why is the LCP required at 500, which is the same as the LP. Is that what the conversation is? Are we talking about lowering the score there or just limit? I mean, I guess I'm confused on what is that the question, or is it grandfathering in some of the LMLPs that have been in the field for 10 years?
My understanding of it was a lot of people are having trouble passing the EPPP at the clinical level. That was so kind of doing away with that and needing to pass. That's how I thought of it.
So like replacing that score with the experience is what
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I thought of it. But
I think that becomes part of the question is initially, could it become a pathway for people who, for whatever reason, just aren't good test takers? And then, in addition to those people who've practiced for many years, I think to the point, the more we talk about it, the more we're going to figure out that there are kind of nuanced issues that we're going to have to think about and have guardrails in place in our kind of joint attempt to add good clinicians into what we know is an area that has a pretty significant workforce issue. but continue to have enough guardrails to protect the public.
As someone who's had an LMLP I would like to see evidence of continued education that's not just for licensure renewal, but showing that they want continued professional development as well, and that they're staying on top of things, not just checking a box kind of. And I'm not sure how that would work, but I feel like that would add to the competency along with the supervision.
Josh, I'm curious, the people that you work with that are like in this position, do you find that they are annoyed or like, why do I have to go find someone to sign
Yeah.
this? Or
Yeah.
okay,
I work with
they're
someone
frustrated.
I work with someone who's a great clinician who asked me honestly the other day whether she could keep working for me because she didn't pass her EPPP again. And she was super sad and super frustrated. I was like, yeah, of course. You can be an LMLP for as long as you want. I wish you could be an LCP because you've been practicing for 20 years. You have more experience than I do. Um, and again, I don't think she's a singular based on, I mean, look at the responses on the survey, right? There are so many remarks about this issue.
Yeah, I have one at my agency that he's probably the best clinician I know, about 10 years. He's about at the 10-year mark.
It feels like it'd be hard to regulate 10 years though. Because I've had my license 10 years. Who could attest? I would have trouble finding someone. Yeah, he's been a consistently practicing physician for 10 years. Now, because I've worked many places over 10 years, and I don't think that's an uncommon experience. And tracking hours for 10 years, if we set an hour mark. So I don't know that number of year. I think someone said that there's a lot, it gets complicated. That wasn't the word used. But I think it does. Because if you're going to regulate it, how? Over a decade.
It almost need to come with like lots of letters of recommendations and like Sarah was saying certain course. I don't know. Like that's a good point.
Well, that's the thing, because like someone could be a good clinician with 2 years, so but it has to be, I imagine we want some level of objectivity. Is it number of years, number of hours? Because you could find 10 people that will speak well of you, maybe as a clinician. And if I'm not here to say that any of those are bad, but I think it just gets complicated when you're talking a decade.
Right. And we just talked about how
And
we need to make it easy to
oversight.
keep track of hours for a 2-year period.
Right.
Like,
Right.
how would we
And
do
if
that
you're
for a
willing to
decade?
do it, now if you're willing to do that,
Right.
and oh, hey, we're gonna let this slide, you got to track your hours for 10 years, and you need to show us that falls on you to track or whatever we decide. Maybe that's the compromise is, all right, you don't have to do this thing, but if testing isn't your thing, hopefully tracking is, because you're gonna have to do it for 10 years.
I think the other thing you want to think about too, and I think those are all great points. I think the thing that I would think about taking into consideration too is, and I am a not good test taker, so I will throw myself right into that bucket, right? But in some ways, and I absolutely agree, having regulation is going to be important. And we also don't want to make it feel like it's a punishment by setting a standard that is so long, right? So it's like finding the middle ground. That's part of the discussion, right? But it's like I would absolutely track for 10 years if I absolutely needed to. But at the same time, too, like other people have said, well, we have clinicians that are 2 years in that are fantastic. And so it's figuring out, is there a middle ground for those who truly don't test well? And does it become an hourly piece, an attestation by 10 people piece? But I think maybe just thinking that in mind too, what we know about like the punishers when we look at like behaviorism, right? Like what feels like punishment versus a consequence versus a contingency. I think it's just important things to keep in mind.
I know we're getting close to the end of time here for the meeting, but definitely a good conversation. We should continue. I do want to let you know one of the reasons why we have the standards we have right now from a licensing perspective is when you have a certain score on a test and you have certain, coursework that we're looking at or a certain number of hours for a certain period, there's a really objective way that we can look at a lot of that information and move people through quickly. And when we start opening things up and we start looking a little more subjectively and making judgment, it probably will make the time frame longer to look at certain people unless we can have an objective way to do that. And there's also, some accusations potentially that we could be playing favorites and approving this person and not that person. And that's a dangerous thing. We wouldn't want to get, we'll have to just make sure that we consider all these factors, because part of the reason, even though the standards seem somewhat rigid from a licensing board perspective, given the volume of applicants we get for these professions, it is helpful for us to have clear standards so we can move people through kind of the back and forth between having coursework competencies versus more of the competency type thing that a lot of the accrediting bodies are looking at. On one hand, it's more helpful to the applicant. On the other hand, from a licensing perspective, it's really difficult for us to evaluate all those equitable kind of things that we're looking at compared to, did you take this course or that course, or did you score this way on the test? So just things to think about. But definitely we should continue this conversation at next meeting too.
David, are you going to send out, that you mentioned the other states to look at? Are you going to send those states out?
Yeah, we don't have that
Or-
currently. We'll do some research and we'll
Okay.
look at what all they require so you can kind of compare it. So
Thank
we
you.
see, we'd also, I don't know that we want to be the outlier state compared to everybody else unless it makes sense. So it'd be helpful for comparison to kind of see where everybody's at too.
Right.
Be interesting to see if they have oral boards too for those states as a part of it. And if that might be a way to add in for if there was like a grandfathering or an alternative path, having an oral.
All right, very good. Thank you all.
And Dave,
Our next meeting is scheduled for August 6th.
Dave, if you have 1 second,
Sure.
I want to touch upon one thing under new business. We have the jurisprudence item on item C. We talked about this in the past as far as wanting to launch a webinar series of jurisprudence type questions and make it available for licensees as just a benefit from the BSRB as an alternative to a jurisprudence test. We're at the point to where I think we're ready to start building that, but I'd like to get maybe 2 volunteers or so from each of the advisory committees that could help meet outside of meetings, just kind of to talk about drafting questions. So I wanted to see if there could be just a couple of volunteers from the advisory committee. The time commitment would be maybe half an hour to an hour once a month. We can just set up a Zoom, but it wouldn't be formal. It would just be kind of a conversational type thing where we could just talk about how to draft some of these questions. I just wanted to see if there's any volunteers that I could start meeting with between this and the next meeting.
Volunteer.
Okay, just like Sarah and Iris. Okay, well, thank you. I will, I just wanted to get that in real quick before the end of the meeting, but thank you both for volunteering for that. I'll give you guys more information. I'll send out an email to you both.
All right, next meeting, August 6th, 1 o'clock. Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
All right, very good. You can vote or you can just sign off. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.